I think we are on episode like number 16 or something. So we're cranking these things along and
chugging along,
having a fun little time with it. Welcome back, guys. Silver Bullet Podcast. I'm Colton Zeck, your host. Today, Brandon is back with us for part 2. Brandon is our in-house chiropractor. You can kind of introduce yourself one more time. Go ahead, kind of quick rundown, because if you don't remember who he is, go back to episode 9.
It was either 9 or 10, something like that, yeah.
The one that is general back pain management.
Yep. Dr. Brandon Wallpe.
Move your mic over here in the middle there. That way you can
Here we go.
get into it a little bit. There we go.
Action.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh,
Okay,
by
cool.
the way, I apologize last week, guys. The audio was horrible. That is 100% my fault. Won't happen again. Know what I did. We're moving on.
Cool.
Good.
So again, Dr. Brandon Wallpe. Got an office here at Greensburg Reclaim. In office here Thursdays, and then over in Batesville the rest of the week. Focus a lot on functional movement patterns, but also help with general health, wellness, neurology, and inflammation pathways.
And all the fun stuff.
Yeah, life in between.
For sure. We do really appreciate Brandon and everything he does, and especially with the way that we teach things, they align very well, which is why I think that we had a lot of follow-up questions off of our first podcast. It definitely was one that people liked, mainly because we were targeting two very specific areas of concern among the general public, and one was just identifying how to treat, just general pain, and then the second one being more specific, we were talking about lower back pain. And so if you guys hadn't listened to that one, I do encourage you to go back and listen to it, because we're going to play off of it a little bit today, because the number one question I got back in response, or more of a follow-up to everything else, was trying to get a better understanding of inflammation. And inflammation is a very broad term as far as what people know about it, because everybody thinks inflammation is just this horrible thing that happens to your body, when in all reality it is a very good thing and very needed. But there are some things that, yes, if left unattended, we can have some consequences. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today, and we got a couple things. I got a couple of notes to really cover, but inflammation, as far as how does inflammation, or what all ties into inflammation as far as food and lifestyle and activity, and how stress can be a part of it. Like, there are so many things at play when you're talking about inflammation. So when you're like, we need to control your inflammation, well, what does that mean specifically for an individual? What I mean?
Yeah, it's totally, and you sit there and you think of it's very multifactorial.
Yeah,
there's a lot of variables. We can go back to basic algebra, except for the fact that there's going to be more advanced algebra when determining inflammation patterns. Yeah, we got to solve for basically A through L, and then add X, Y, and Z at the end.
Yeah, I was not a big fan of algebra back in the day, but good news. And if you guys are watching this video, you can see that he brought me a 25-pound book.
It's great for if you want to do any single leg RDLs.
Holy smokes! Holy cow! So inflammation mastery. So talk about this thing real quick. I'm going to turn your mic up a little bit.
Yep, sounds good. So ultimately, the text here, it's by Dr. Alex Vasquez. He is probably one of the foremost leading physicians in the field of inflammatory and metabolic pathways, but also looking into digestive health and impact of basically the entire immune system in a modulation effect to the immune to inflammatory systems. So trying to figure out what is the one thing causing inflammation is going to be nearly impossible, because one thing does not cause inflammation.
It's a systemic approach to
Exactly. So we have to look into all components, whether it be somebody's specific genetic makeup. You also have to look into what can be some of the triggering effects, whether it be from environmental toxins, from food, from different allergens, from one person to another. Like, not all people have specific allergies, just like not all people have specific inflammatory markers to certain things too.
Right.
Like I could breathe in mold and be completely fine. You go walk past 10 people down the street and maybe 20% of them will have a severe allergic reaction because of their genetic makeup and immune response to a specific chemical causing a severe immune and inflammatory response.
And we see that a lot, especially with, let's see here, asthma being one of those. Because you have some people that are, some people say they have sports-induced asthma where it only occurs after a certain respiratory rate is met, or I'm trying to think, like even farmers, when you're around here in farm country, you get around the bean dust can be a trigger for it. But it's never the same for each and every person, but it's still the same generic condition, I guess.
Yeah,
you know what
exactly.
I mean? But it all bases around more of a systemic thing rather than just a one key piece that causes your quote unquote inflammation.
Yeah.
So one of the big things that we got as far as talking about back pain was trying to understand that food can cause inflammation, and that was mind-boggling to some people. Like, inflammation occurs in my body naturally, so you're telling me that food causes inflammation. I think the misunderstanding was that there is inflammation in the actual food that we consume rather than there's an inflammation response due to the food that you consume. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I'm going to try not to knock your water bottle off. So
slide it.
there were a lot of people that were kind of give me some follow-up questions as far as what are the things that cause the most amount of inflammation when it comes to chronic inflammation through or via food.
So, like the most inflammatory presenting type foods, essentially. Honestly, throw at top of the list is anything processed.
Right.
That's number one. Ultimately, you throw processed grains, processed dairy, processed sugars. Going to be the biggest things. And then even when you move into a natural level, like even whole foods sometimes can create an inflammatory or an immune response. We call these food intolerances or food sensitivities.
Right.
They literally will create an internal visceral inflammatory event. And those are things that can be tested for. Like you can literally do specific testing to determine if you have a specific allergy, and no, it's not going to your allergist and having them pinprick your arm and seeing if you have a response. No, this is like a specific blood test to see if you develop an IgG or an immunoglobulin G immune response to a specific food particle as soon as it would enter into your system.
Right.
And when that happens, it triggers an inflammation pathway as an adaptive response to recover. And so if you have a specific food, like I have some patients that have sensitivities to spinach.
Yeah. I know one of them. I know one of them, yeah. And you think this is a superfood in the world, well, this person physically can't consume spinach because of what it does to the body.
Exactly.
You said something very careful that I want people to rehear on. There's an inflammation response to something into the bloodstream to try to kickstart healing process.
Correct.
So inflammation is a very needed thing in the body. We are always trying to hit stimulus to create adaptation to bring back to homeostasis. It's stress and adapt. It's always what your body's trying to do. It's a very smart machine. If something foreign that the body doesn't like is happening, there will be inflammation occurring to get rid of it, get it back to where it needs to be, right? So that is a very good and natural thing to happen. The problem that we run into, especially when you're talking about people who consume high processed foods, and a lot of the reason that processed food is the problem is because a lot of it is stripped of actual living and helpful nutrients.
Bingo.
Right?
Yep.
And is replaced with something else, something that is going to help with shelf life, something is going to help with the preservation of that food particle, so it doesn't break down. If you think about it, anything that lives turns into mold eventually, right?
Yeah, over time.
Yeah, if you get something that doesn't, it's more than likely a processed variation of that food. So
I call those food-like substances.
Food-like substances, that's right. So so essentially you have a high diet full of processed food. You have people who consume sugar like it's going out of style, and that in my mind is probably one of the worst ones there is out there. And then what was the other one you said?
Dairies. Processed dairies.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have all these different things, and you got to imagine if you consume a variation of either three of those things with each and every meal, your body is constantly in a state of inflammation because inflammation is always being sent out trying to fix what is happening. This would be an example over an extended period of time of being in excess chronic inflammation. Correct? And that is where we see people who have really bad problems when it comes to pain. Correct?
Big time, yeah.
So in a isolated situation, you go to a cousin's birthday party and you have cake and ice cream, you have an inflammation response due to the sugar that was in the food, your body should be able to handle that. But if it's over and over and over and over again, it's just like anything else, your body becomes essentially not as tolerant. Correct. Tolerant to it. But that will create an intolerance somewhere else, right? So that was one of the biggest things that people were asking about as far as food causing inflammation. It's not like the inflammation is actually in the food itself. It is what your body does as a reaction to consuming.
Exactly. Yeah. Nothing is necessarily, as far as anything that we take into our system or we're exposed to within the environment, inherently has some sort of a automatic inflammatory response.
Right.
Like nothing, it just varies upon person to person based upon their genetic makeup, based upon their internal immune health and response to specific things. That's why you can have such a varying degree from person to person regarding how they will actually adapt to their specific environments.
Right. That makes sense. So it makes you think that, all these things that we're talking about as far as trying to boost immunity would also suggest that you have a healthy inflammation, regulation.
Yeah.
Would that be suffices to say?
A specific inflammation pathway that actually works the way it's meant to for adaptation. And as humans, we naturally should have that.
Right.
I mean, we're meant to. Like, that's the reason why we have the general adaptation basically general adaptation syndrome. So as we work through and adapt to our environments in different ways, we have to have some form of inflammatory response, because if we don't, we will not adapt.
Sure.
We have to have an immune regulation pathway that has to occur to every single thing that gets exposed to our internal body from the external environment.
Yeah, in the form of food, or could be food,
air quality,
could be pathogens, could be anything.
Yeah, could be licking your carpet for some reason.
So it's and now you guys are kind of getting an idea of how complex the body is and how truly amazing it is. But it's a perfect segue or a perfect tie into inflammation. Even James and I have talked about it early on in a couple podcasts, was how inflammation is tied to your gut. Oh, yeah. Right. And so, your inflammation response is essentially the gut-brain connection, and that's essentially where all inflammation reaction essentially starts, right?
For the most part, yeah.
So, talk about that a little bit, I guess, in your words, because I know you have a pretty fascinating understanding of gut health and how it is very important in order to manage inflammation. Because I know even in your line of work, helping people with inflammatory issues, one of the first questions that you get is, or you ask, is essentially how their gut health has been and how to check that. And then you can tell during your adjustments if there is something aligned or offline with the digestive system or the GI tract or something. So you're checking for those things in response to somebody saying that I have pain, knowing good and well they have an inflammatory problem.
Exactly.
But we're in the gut. How do we connect all those?
Yeah. So ultimately we look at the neurologic pathways that will impact digestive health and gut health. Actually resides within the lower back. So the neurology directly feeding the intestinal function. So small intestine, large intestine, rectal, colon function. Literally, proper biofeedback mechanisms occur from the lower back nerve rootlets that then will go to the periphery within the actual organ systems. So we can see if there is a specific region within the lumbar spine as we're going through the testing. I'll see specific areas that impact that neurology directly and ask, okay, how's your bowel function been? Like, it's not uncommon that I talk about poop within visits. Some people, usually younger kids, they laugh about that. They think it's hilarious. And
biofeedback.
Yeah. I mean, but it all comes back to, did they eat something that has caused more gastrointestinal discomfort, bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation, anything that creates complete dysfunction. And the symptom can be whatever, but the common cause, though, of all that is inflammation directly into the digestive tract. And some of this can vary too, because some people, they're like, I don't know the rhyme or reason as to why. It just kind of happens. And some people, they come in with an underlying condition, whether it be celiacs, where they literally could die from eating something from gluten-based. Could be someone with irritable bowel issue, which is literally going to be an inflammatory pathway issue. They could have a problem with Crohn's disease as well. Also, another inflammatory-based pathway that causes degradation to the gut. And when we look at leaky gut, there's a lot of components to it. It's like we look at food being one of the big issues with it, which is true. Specific foods can cause a complete breakdown within the normal flora bacteria of the intestinal mucosa, and then lead to degradation to that lining, and then allow for larger food particles to then not break down appropriately and actually get directly into the bloodstream. And then the liver has to process it.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Exactly. It shouldn't be. The liver's job is to literally facilitate proper micronutrient utilization for energy purposes or storage purposes. Or evacuation. So, and that's what is meant to occur. Well, say we have this breakdown, whether it be caused by food, whether it be caused by, and unfortunately one of the larger reasons why we see a depletion of the normal flora is because of stress. Mental, physical, emotional stress at times can be one of the causal factors of this. And tie that in with inflammatory food, and right now you have the perfect storm.
Yeah, and that was essentially the second aspect of inflammation that we were going to get to. And it was ironic that I tried to lead you into the leaky gut thing, and you took my bait pretty well there. That worked out good. So I've always been of the mindset that, and I say always been, this is pre my education in this field and further trying to understand it, stress is either good or bad. It's distress or it's eustress. Like that's what you're taught in school as somebody who went through a health and movement studies program in college, just trying to learn more about anatomy and physiology. Like there's two types of stress, distress and eustress. Just good stress and bad stress, right? But you never really went into understanding how they can play a factor in your overall holistic health. Okay, and so when you're talking about inflammation management, stress is stress. And I had somebody tell me that one time. They're like, you're thinking of it wrong. There are two categories of stress, but stress is stress. That's it. So how do you link stress essentially to inflammation? I guess was the follow-up question that I had from a couple people.
So, and yes, stress is stress, but depending on the mental, emotional response to the specific stressor, it can create either one, a release of essentially a cytokine type storm, which will increase your inflammation, or two, release endorphins.
Which everybody wants dopamine and everything.
Exactly.
All good oxytocin.
Exactly. Like that's a beautiful thing, and we get into an awesome euphoric state because of it naturally, not because of any other reasons. But when we look at that stress impact still, no matter what, there is going to be some sort of an adaptive phase that then leads to some form of higher level of inflammation. And granted, there's going to be a higher negative impact the more negative of an approach we have to things. So the more distress we have, the higher levels of inability to adapt that we'll have. We'll have higher levels of inflammation that will ultimately create a detrimental impact to our health. Versus if we have high levels of eustress, so like we can have the same exact event going on. All right, so let's take into consideration, so like we're in fall time right now. School just started. All right, 9 weeks ago, something like that, and we're fortunately still able to get all the way to fall break for a lot of kids. They started it. So think of it like this: we have fall break. Some families are going on vacation. All right, some families sit there and go, vacation, this is a really awesome thing, like sweet. They're in a eustress moment, and they're sitting there going, all right, let's do this. I'm so
Excited.
excited for these events that we're going to be able to do, the time that I'm going to get to spend with my family and have that good quality time that has been much needed and unable to be had for a long period of time. They're just stoked. They're excited. They're ready to go. They've got dopamine, oxytocin. They got everything pumping.
They got everything pumping up there.
And then you have some people who are like, I gotta go on vacation. I gotta plan this. I gotta plan that.
Yeah.
I don't really want to go. I don't want to do anything.
You essentially start out as Clark Griswold for the Christmas vacation at the beginning, and then by the end, you're his little rant in the living room.
Exactly. And ultimately, those are same scenario. Two completely different mental emotional responses.
It cracks me up thinking about people, maybe a little bit more applicable for people here, for people who just loathe going to work.
Yeah.
And there's this, every once in a while, you really enjoy what you do. Mm-hmm. But there's such a overwhelming majority of the time that the work causes you so much stress, and you know about it, and you dwell on it, and you take that home with you, and it just becomes this overwhelming sense of almost entrapment to ensuring that you are going to have inflammation issues for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And there was a couple years of my life that I kind of spent in that. And the bad part about it was initially coming out of school is, the job that I took, and I was in the fitness realm. Like, I loved what I was doing, loved the people, absolutely hated the people I worked for and the corporation I worked for. And there was this ongoing battle in my head, and I can tell you which one won because I'm no longer there right now.
Yeah.
And so I see that with a lot of people, and some of these people, they've been in the same job for 30, 40 years, and they're wondering why they can't see any continual adaptive progress, whether it's in the gym. Maybe they've been the exact same body, shape, size, everything. They've tried everything for the past 15 years, and they can't get anything to change. That can almost be in my mind, a correlation to your body's ability to adapt to stress is almost shot.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Which is a crazy thing to think about, because your body's meant to adapt to every stressor possible. But I could throw the book at you. Yeah. Might not change you a bit.
Yeah, because ultimately, I love that you bring that up too, because I was in the same scenario. Like, before I started the practice, I was working for an office outside of O&I as soon as I graduated. Like, I was fortunate enough to have a good job opportunity. But as time went, there was a lot of toxicity within the work environment. Again, love what I was doing. I still do. Like, now I just have more control over it, and love it even more. Yeah. Like, it is a eustress moment that allows for me to do what I do every single day.
Makes things nice.
It was to a point though where I was working at previously, I was physically breaking down. Yeah. I was physically not well, and I flat out had a lot of problems with stress, anxiety, inflammation, digestive dysfunction. Like, I ate clean, I exercised, I did all of the things that were meant to be done for health. But what was the one variable? Yeah. There was a single variable that literally created a cascading effect, a downward spiral. And my wife Lindsay can tell you about it. Like, she was with me. Like, we started dating at that point in time frame, and she's been with me through this whole journey. Right. And it's been awesome. But she has seen me at my worst, and she has seen me at my best, as all spousal relationships should be.
They usually do.
And it took a change of that environment.
Sure.
So, and it doesn't have to be just employee to employer. It doesn't have to be a job or employment-based type environment of toxicity that can create this issue. It can literally just be home life.
Your brain is very smart at picking up and filling in what it suspects is to happen. Kind of like a precursor, kind of like a forecast, like a forecasting what is to happen, right? Yeah. And that determines a lot of hormone production and essentially stimulation. And so it's what I mean by, like, dwelling on work or taking work home with you. Like, you might leave the environment, but you are still in the environment because it's in you.
Exactly.
And so there are things, and it's hard to put as much emphasis as it really needs to have on it, but like if you don't love what you do every day, it's causing you to die quicker.
Exactly.
And a lot of it is just because of how your body reacts to inflammation via stress. Okay, stress can cause the inflammation in your body essentially because you have. And you can kind of correct me if I'm wrong here, but like our stress hormone cortisol, you've heard us talk about it all the time, essentially is the culprit to trying to get your body to come out of its fight or flight mode. Okay. When stress hormone goes up, you think about it, anytime you are stressed, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up. It's vasodilation. It's trying to get your body prepped to fight or run.
Exactly.
Right? So
sympathetic drive.
Correct. And we need to get out of that system to get back into the rest and digest and then the parasympathetic and just chill.
Exactly.
Right? And that's what the cortisol hormone is supposed to do. But guess what? If you're living with cortisol just running 100% of the time, it's going back to the ability to not handle the stress. Like it has no ability to adapt to the stress.
Correct.
And that's what I mean by you can't handle stress. It's not that you don't experience stress. It's that you can't adapt from the stress. And that can come from something as simple as an environmental workplace.
Oh, exactly.
And it's not a very fun thing to deal with, but it's one of those things that you have to have a kind of the sit down, talk in the mirror and be like, okay, I know the elephant in the room. This is the culprit to a lot of things. Essentially, am I going to take the plunge? Am I going to make the fix? Because it's a big risk, but physiologically, I really think you have to look at where the stress comes in your life and try to figure out, is it good, bad, okay, but can I adapt from it?
Yeah. And one big key is there's a big question that always should be asked. Does this thing in my life bring me joy, or does it bring me torment?
For sure.
And if you have something that you can't answer, that more than half of the time if more than half the time it does not bring you joy, there probably needs to be a bit of a heart check.
Yeah, there's just you gotta weigh in the things that there are things that are here to help me thrive and help me live as a human being. There are also things here that are meant to, for lack of better words, make me die quicker.
Yeah, because there's a lot of jobs available.
There are. All right, so far we've covered inflammation in a couple different formats. We've covered it in the form of food and what it does as a reaction. Essentially, we've covered it stress, and that can be physical, self-induced, environmental, all of those different factors. Inflammation via injury. Let's talk a little bit more on the acute side and then how it can transform into a chronic problem. Problem.
Yes. So say you decide to, go for a run. I personally don't like running, but say
everybody has a good idea of our stance on running for health purposes. Go ahead.
It's good for a good emotional release at times if it clears your mind. I like to shoot. I like to shoot guns and
so is archery,
bows. So, but ultimately, looking at an acute injury, say you're out for a run, say you misstep, roll your ankle. Common thing to have happen. I mean, it's honestly very, very much so one of the most common things that I'll see as far as an acute form of injury from a specific type of movement, for that matter. So you roll your ankle, all of a sudden it swells up like a balloon. And you go, holy cannoli, what is this? And you say, well, okay, I guess I better put ice on this because it's getting inflamed. And
Did you listen to our podcast last week?
Oh, dude, yeah.
All right, go ahead.
My philosophy on ice and heat, my patients know exactly what it is.
All right.
And it is not to use either.
Right.
So ultimately you have this swelling effect that occurs. So this is an acute form of inflammation, an acute form of injury because of damage that has occurred to, in this case, when we look at the ankle, it could be a multitude of joint spaces. There's, let me think, probably like 17, 18 different joints within the ankle.
It's a hot mess down there.
So ultimately you have specific ligaments and tendons that are helping to support that ankle. So we could have some ligamentous damage, we can have some tendinous damage and soft tissue injury to that region. Well, we have to do something that's going to allow for it to heal. And the body's innate and natural, just the form of a natural response is to say,
swell.
Let's swell, let's get blood to it, let's get fluid to it, let's support this area, let's start bringing new material in.
Nutrients to the area that needs fixing.
Exactly.
What a profound thought.
Right? It was like it's by perfect design.
Right.
And so we sit here
and
look at that. Yeah. So somebody says, gosh, you throw ice on that and elevate it.
Right.
I'm like, no.
Because we don't want it to swell, we want it to feel better.
Yeah. All you do with ice is you numb it. You numb it very quickly, unfortunately. And it can ultimately, if you ice it for too long, cause damage to nerve endings, which then also impedes your normal physiologic sensory response to those areas too. But you, more than anything, slow the healing rate.
Right.
You cause vasoconstriction, you slow down the blood flow, you prevent nutrients from actually getting to the tissues that could be within your body. And I say could be within your body because not all people have the appropriate dietary intake, collagen intake, protein intake, and amino acids available within their internal system to actually be transported to help it heal. So like, the ice and heat thing is one thing, but if somebody is having a lingering injury that continues to persist for a period of time, they really need to start checking and seeing what it is they're putting in their body, because you have to have some sort of substance and building block to build.
It's funny. I actually, next week, I'm going to podcast with somebody who I've been working with for a while, remotely, nutrition-wise. Had a surgery scheduled for a week to go in and do some internal work as far as, without getting too far into her special thing, it was going to be more, what's the word I'm looking for here? Very specific. It was not going to be, what's the word I'm looking for?
It's not going to be invasive?
It is invasive, sorry.
So it isn't invasive.
I could not think of the word I was looking for, thank you. Yep. It was going to be a partially invasive surgery, so I said, look, there's something that is coming down a pipeline that you have the opportunity to prepare for. Essentially, we were doing a very persistent understanding. We were trying to really identify her ability to handle stress and her body's ability to recover well. Yes, it started with food, it started with sleep. She's running for political office. Like there's a lot of things that amount to stress and her body's ability.
Distress.
For sure. So I said, look, you have the ability to prepare for this. Okay. And we did the exercises and all kinds of stuff. But the week that it came up, we paid very special attention to her body's ability to repair by giving it nutrients in a very specific pattern prior to the surgery. And I told her, I said, now look, here's the thing that's going to happen. And you know good and damn well, she was actually in the healthcare business. When you wake up, what are they going to offer you for food? They're going to offer you orange juice. They're going to offer you your choice of
Jello cups,
stuff like this. And I said, now what are all the things that we've learned so far about these foods? They're processed, they're high in sugar. It does not do well for my body's inflammatory response.
Throw in the colored dyes in there too, and we're really cooking with toxicity.
I didn't even mention those things, but yeah, that's a good point. I said, here's what you need to have. You need to have 2 protein shakes essentially in your bag and ready for when you wake up.
Bingo.
Those could be your first meals. I said your body's ability to have building blocks to repair tissue damage are going to be there. You're going to need the protein hierarchical need, exactly what you need to do, so that way you have proper cellular communication. You have all those good things happening, and your body can then use what's left to rebuild structural tissue. It's like they are going to be invading your body, and your body is not going to like that. There's going to be an inflammation response. Give it the tools that it needs to help the healing process. It wasn't days later. She's like, I could not believe how much better I feel.
Oh yeah.
I mean, obviously the surgery was a very important aspect of it, but as far as like the area that they were intruding on, she's like, feels great. And you had no idea. And that is a huge aspect to people, especially when they are talking about, the ankle specifically is a great and a unique, and it's no wonder why it's the most commonly thing that gets, from a rolling standpoint, as far as why it takes so long to heal. There's ligaments and tendons in there. Ligaments themselves, okay?
No direct blood supply.
There's no direct blood supply.
Yeah.
You can't get nutrients to ligaments.
Yeah.
So like,
you have to perfuse them.
Correct. So that takes time. the last thing I'd want to do is slow that time down.
Bingo.
You know what I mean? So she didn't ice the area, you know, as far as where they were making incisions and whatnot. Like, it was just heal, move, try not to be in one place, consume the foods needed for building blocks to essentially rejuvenate the area.
Yeah.
Profound. Right?
Yeah.
The body has the ability to heal. Give it the things it needs to heal, not the things that healthcare system wants you to consume afterwards.
Yeah, or say, oh, you're in pain here. We'll just put a little bit of morphine in here.
Here's some very heavy and high-powered
narcotics,
or whatever it was.
Which depletes the normal flora, and then you start the cycle again with inflammation.
So, and this can be something very important to bring up to people. You know, when you train. And you work out and you've been doing it for a while, like, eventually something's going to wear out one day. You're going to push too far and you're going to have an injury. This is a fact.
It's inevitable.
It is inevitable. And it's not to say that things are, you know, lifting weights or exercising is dangerous. It's good for your health, but there are just things where you get in the way of wanting to do something specific, and maybe you're focusing on something else while you're doing a movement, whatever the situation is. Like, you walk in, your back is kind of bum on the day, your knee hurts, your elbow hurts, your shoulder hurts. Like, there's a joint that's probably not feeling very good, okay? This specific conversation that we just had can be very important to you. Because if you're having that nagging issue, and you go home and you're not sleeping more than 4.5 hours a night, and you drink 6 Mick Ultras essentially every other day, and you're being very sedentary when you leave, or you fill in the blank with all these things that we've talked about that promote or the things that promote inflammation, it's going to be a very slow process for it to heal. And a lot of, you know, people, especially in our facility, come back, they're like, you know, I had my day where my knee really hurt and we were doing lunges. Well, guess what? Just because your knee hurts doing lunges doesn't mean I'm going to stop programming lunges. We're doing them every week, sometime multiple times. So they're going to come back next week and it's like, oh, lunges are on the board and I'm not 100% healed, but I'm about 75, so I'll go ahead and do it again. And then we're just re-inoculating the issue. And so there you have a battle that you really have to face here. Okay, if you are truly trying to heal something, you got to make sure that the healing blocks are there. Right.
And that's where if you continue doing the same exact thing and expecting a different result, they call that insanity. So ultimately, especially with, like, you talk about knee issues and lunges, half the time it's because they don't activate their glutes. The butt doesn't fire. So if they're not intrinsically activating the main muscle mover that is supposed to be supporting that movement, what is going to happen, you will have a increased load put to the front knee, and it's going to be mildly painful as the quad becomes dominant to elevate you instead of the glute.
And we covered these kind of mechanical and chemical patterns that we talked about in the first podcast. So if that sounded very foreign to you, go back and listen to that, because that was a good conversation. So you know, we're talking about inflammation. We're talking about how to manage said inflammation, especially when it is causing us pain, and the different ways to look at doing it. We've covered inflammation through food. We've covered inflammation through stress. We've covered inflammation through means of an acute injury. Okay. Now we can get a little bit more deep down into a rabbit hole, if you will. And I know you're just itching to talk about this. But before we get into this aspect, I need you to know, and this is directed to everybody who's listening to this, this is going to be the healthy minority of people he's talking about.
Very much so.
More than likely, you fall into one of those 3 categories that we just mentioned. We didn't really cover sleep, okay? It can be a huge driver as well. You got any quick things you want to put on sleep on there?
To be fair, sleep is actually pretty simple. You need it. Like, you need to get adequate amount of rest for full function, and that may vary from person to person depending on one, genetics, based upon their nutrition status, based upon their overall health and function, and also whether or not they have kids. That will dictate a lot. But ultimately, there needs to be, at a minimum level, either one, you go to bed sooner, or you try to find a way to adapt. But a solid amount of REM sleep, getting into a theta wave sleep, you need at least 6 hours of that each night, at least. And if you're waking up randomly, you're not getting in theta wave. You may go to bed at 10 and wake up at 4, and you're waking up randomly, you're not getting deep quality.
Yeah, he's talking
sleep.
About theta wave. It's a part of the deep sleep that you get into when you're in your rapid eye movement sleep. Okay,
exactly.
And so. And the way that I understand, especially when you're talking back and tying it into inflammation, like how does sleep help inflammation? Sleep helps everything. It is one of the most important aspects of our human evolution. If it wasn't for sleep, like the evolutionary process of human beings, of how we have essentially determined the hierarchy of what is important in our lives, like sleep is the biggest mistake we've ever made. But it is not. And especially when you're directly tying it back to inflammation, the way that I understood it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is sleep allows you for more of that evacuation of inflammation when the time comes, correct?
Yeah.
So you roll your ankle, okay, and getting good sleep allows, the body the ability for a longer time to heal with the nutrients that it hopefully has. But then from there, once the flag's been pulled, it's kind of like, construction on a highway. It's the time where they're like, okay, pull the barrels off the side, now we can kind of resume free operation. That happens when you sleep. But if you don't sleep, it stays under construction, it stays swollen, you know what I mean? So,
and then it becomes 465.
Oh God. Yeah, so exactly. So very important. But while we still have a little time, let's get into the cellular aspect of it.
Yeah. So one quick thing on the sleep, just the main reason for it too is we talked about the sympathetic, parasympathetic. This is when your parasympathetic activity becomes so much more active. It's in that resting state.
Yes, it is.
And that's what allows for the reduction of that sympathetic fight-flight drive.
Man, I just want to jump in and start talking more about this now. Yes, because there are two essentially systems that we are in, at a given time. Right? We are either in fight or flight, or we are in rest and digest. And we need to err towards being in rest and digest more. Otherwise, you err, or you chance the fact that you are not able to adapt from stress because you are in the fight or flight so stinking much. Yeah,
and a big component of this too to think about, because this is a part of what's called the autonomic nervous system. So we have the voluntary nervous system, the autonomic. The autonomic is this parasympathetic, sympathetic type fight, flight mode, and
it happens without you having to tell it to do it.
You have no conscious thought of it. No, but you do have the ability to control how it manifests.
Correct,
and that's through
environmental stuff.
Exactly, environmental, thought, mental, emotional, social-based, environmental-based impact. And this even plays a role when we segue into the cellular-based function of things.
Right.
So as your body goes into that fight-flight mode and it's in this sympathetic state of stress, we develop cellular oxidation. All right. So let me ask you a question. Do you think cellular oxidation is a good thing?
Just because I know, or should I pretend?
I mean, do whatever. Pretend if you want.
Okay, it's a good thing.
Unfortunately, it is not. So when you look at metal that sits out basically in somebody's yard, you got an old junker car that's sitting out in the field. What happens to it over time?
It rusts.
Yeah, it oxidizes. It rusts. That's not a good thing to have happen. And unfortunately, we have that happen inside of our bodies on a regular basis because of our inability to appropriately adapt to the stressors around us. So cellular-based stress, cellular-based oxidation occurs. And this is where we have the development of free radicals. Right. And the inability for your cellular structure to actually adapt. Like, this puts us to the most simplistic level of human physiology that we do have. So if our cells that make up our entire body and function are unable to adapt within their own environment, how do you think we are going to adapt?
We don't.
Bingo.
Right. So is it fair to say that cellular oxidation is more of a byproduct, and we are not able to filter out essentially the byproduct of cells? Or are they themselves, because of their lack of ability to perform, just essentially withering away?
Yeah. So fortunately, I mean, we have all cells will inevitably die off. I mean,
Right.
it just happens. We have a natural cycle that occurs within the internal human system where cells, when they no longer of use and they've served their purpose, they will die off, and then ultimately new cells are going to be replicated, regenerated in the process. But if we're not getting the most out of what our cells functionally are capable to do, like think of it like this: is you have a thoroughbred racehorse that has the ability to win the Triple Crown every single year, and all of a sudden you just decide to change its entire nutrition and workout regimen, and all of a sudden it's now filled with oxidative stress within the internal body, and its cells are not able to adapt. It will not perform at peak level. And that's where we look at the impact into the internal cell is how is your mitochondria working? These are the powerhouse generators within the entire cell. So we're going to go to cellular biology now.
Right.
You have the mitochondria, which are producing ATP, which is the overall energy form of the cell. And there are specific byproducts that are created in the process of making energy. All right, so
Talk about this a little bit in the energy systems podcast.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. We have mitochondria that are producing ATP within the cell of the human body. And ultimately, we have byproducts from this, some of which can be heat and inflammation, unfortunately, in the process. But you have to have the appropriate building blocks to allow for this to even occur in the first place. One, we need to have appropriate oxygenation to the cells. So that plays a role with one, and this goes back to like some of the injury scenarios. You create vasodilation, you slow blood flow. What does blood transport?
Nutrients.
And oxygen.
And oxygen, yes.
So if you don't have appropriate oxygen transportation to get to the cell of the specific tissue that is needing to heal, it is unable to produce function within the cell. Your mitochondria are not able to produce ATP appropriately. You're not able to have regenerative capabilities within the tissue, and so you ultimately will slow that down. So like there are actually some people who have a physiologic issue that is going on where they don't have a proper oxygen saturation occurring, and a lot of that is because of oxidative stress to their internal system. And so either that, or they have a problem with, say, hemoglobin's ability to bind oxygen as the blood goes from the lungs, pumps from the heart to the lungs, back to the heart and out. So if they don't have the ability to oxygenate the blood appropriately because it's not binding to the proteins the right way, we'll tend to have issues. So they're not going to be able to heal appropriately. So a lot of the times you can utilize specific amino acids and specific substances, like L-arginine is one of those. Allows for appropriate nitric oxide production within the body. So then you can actually transport through basically create vasodilation, but also impact hemoglobin impact. So you can bind oxygen better, transport to the cell, and do specific things. Like that's why we use laser therapy at the office every once in a while when somebody has an acute injury, because the specific frequency of infrared light will actually activate the pathway that causes oxygen to leave hemoglobin, go into the cell, so it like basically pounds it straight into that cell and into that tissue, so then the oxygen can get into the mitochondria to help with the process of production of ATP.
Right. So it's not necessarily something you just feel right away. You're just giving it the tools it needs to heal.
Yeah, and it increases the rate at which the body heals by like 60 to 70%.
Especially you can really pump those mitochondria full of some stuff that it needs.
Oh yeah. The problem still always comes back though too is how well is this person nourished?
Right.
How well do they have the right building blocks to enable it?
That was my follow-up question. Is somebody who finds themselves in this specific scenario, is it a more higher likelihood that they also have those same inflammatory problems when it comes to food, lifestyle, and all those things?
Yeah.
Or do you really find people who have all of those things 100% in check, and they're just this medical anomaly where they have this oxidative issue?
Rarely.
Very rarely.
Very rare.
Okay,
maybe
very rare.
Yeah, like maybe one out of every like 2-3.
So then there's a good chance if somebody is a walking ball of chronic inflammation who has, inflammatory problems due to food, and then due to the sedentary lifestyle, or due to the way that they sleep, or the way that they handle their stress, they also have this oxidative problem when it comes to cellular function. But if they were to fix from the top down, there's a good chance that if they fix a lot of the nourishing components of inflammation in their food, or they fix handling their stress, that on a cellular level, that itself will improve.
Exactly. And especially on a genetic level too. Yeah. So on a genetic level as well, we look at different genetic sequencing that is either latent or active. So we look at it's in the realm of epigenetics. Dr. Bruce Lipton has done a lot of work in this, so that's a good name to refer to.
But to express your epigenetics.
Exactly.
Right.
So we can all have similar genetic sequencing, but whether or not we have the specific inflammation pathways that activate that latent sequence, we may or may not ever present with a specific condition. Like we could have the genetics to have this. So like people have a higher,
shows.
Yeah, exactly. People have a higher, like when people say, oh yeah, you know, I have heart disease runs in my family. You have control of that. You don't have to just automatically assume.
Write it off.
Yeah, because when you look at most people who have had these types of inflammatory-based chronic health issues, so Dr. James Chestnut is another really good name. He's actually another chiropractic physician, but he talks about this exact phenomena where we look at chronic health issues. 95% of them are inflammation based.
Right.
And it's due to lifestyle. It's not due to whether or not, you know, you've had 6 family members that had this specific condition. Yeah, you have a genetic variance that increases your likelihood to develop it.
Right.
But it doesn't mean you have to cause that. Doesn't mean you have to start digging your grave and that being the cause of it.
Yeah.
Like there's ways that you can control it.
Yeah, I know I say we deal with that a lot, and it's mainly just because this is a very common thing that people do when they come into a fitness facility, and good on them because they're not just succumbing to what they think is going to be the inevitable. It's, my dad, they'll come in and they'll be like, I'm just now coming in because there was a recent tragic event, or my dad had a heart attack, or my family member had a stroke, or one of these things, and it's like, this runs in my family, I want to get ahead of it, and they know they can get ahead of it. Otherwise, why would they have walked into the facility? You know what I mean? So it is one of those things that, yes, genetically you can have a predisposition, but it doesn't mean it is something
not set in stone.
It's not set in stone. It's just one of these things that it's like, and I think James and I back a couple podcasts ago, we talked about, the possibility of being one of the statistical numbers. Like, it's just one of those things that, okay, if you know that is one of the things, that is kind of 6 steps behind you, how are you going to stay in front of it? Are you going to be proactive in that sense, or is it going to be something where we become a statistic? And there is an opportunity there for you because, people like Dr. Chestnut and whatnot, like they talk about those different type of things and how there's a lot of science and stuff proven to it. It's just you are essentially your ability to express your genetic potential rather than your genetic sequencing that was given to you at birth.
Exactly.
Is that fair?
Yeah, very, very much so.
Sweet.
And that's a cool thing about that. And also, there's a lot of ways to really adapt it, and most of them come from lifestyle changes, and most people, I'll be honest, are very uncomfortable making those changes.
Because it's so drastic compared to what the lifestyle was they either grew up in or what they see that their family is. But there's correlations that you can make just looking at lifestyle and activity and essential, conscious decision making. Like you tie it to one group of people and then look at what that people is disposed to as far as you're talking about chronic health. Like it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, exactly.
Like nothing. Anyways, we're not going to get into a motivational speech, but you want to make some changes. Like it's not going to be an easy downstream travel. You know what I mean? But
the unfortunate thing is that, like you said, it usually takes a tragic event. It takes something to unfortunately scare people to experience somebody else go through something to where they really start to check themselves. And they say, you know what? I really know that I could be at higher risk, and I know that I need to take the reins on this and do something to make that change. The challenge comes when they hear something that they're not comfortable with, that they have to make a change for, that makes life a little more inconvenient.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's a really heartbreaking thing to have somebody say, you know what?
Got to give up something.
Yeah, and they're like, I can't do that. And I have to have that tough conversation with a lot of patients and flat out say, if you're not willing to make that change, I can't help you.
Yeah.
And that is a hard thing to say, and I honestly end up referring them somewhere else, because if they're not willing to make a subtle change, usually it's something very simple, something that is a vice that is holding on and gripping their life in a negative way. And if they're unable to make that adaptation or change, something very easy, like I understand if it's like a huge lifestyle overhaul, we work in baby steps. But if it's something as simple as like, I kid you not, I had somebody that literally drank 7 pops a day, and I said, don't drink them. Like, you want to help yourself feel better, you want to function better, don't drink 7 Pepsis in a day. And they flat out said, I can't do that, and I'm not going to do that. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I physically am not going to be able to help you for more than 2 days.
Right. Yeah,
and that's it.
Yeah, and we similar situations here as well. But there are obviously, and now we don't want to get down to the psychology of things, but there are different ways to handle those different situations, and sometimes laying it all out there and saying that this is essentially what could happen, sometimes that works. But there are some people that I know that physically can't handle making something that they've held on to for such a long period of time.
Change is scary.
It is, and it can be, but I'm telling you right now, I've never met one person that became healthier that regretted it.
Bingo. No doubt.
Never. We're rolling on past about an hour here.
Oh, nice.
Got anything you wanna wrap up with? I mean, we were able to cover information in 4 specific areas that I think are very important for people to know.
Yeah.
Okay. We talked about ways to at least identify it. At least everything that we're talking about here was identification. Okay, identification of stress and inflammation, and how that can essentially play into your ability to heal.
Yep.
Okay,
heal
so
and
now,
adapt.
And when you come back, we'll talk about better evacuation techniques of inflammation, and how we promote inflammation reduction via movement and via food and different practices and stuff like that.
Specific things that can be done for it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And ways to test for it even too.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are. It's crazy, and we mentioned this before, but more people would rather be extreme than be consistent when it comes to a lot of things. It can be, you can apply that to weight loss, you can apply that to injury rehabilitation, it could be anything. Okay, you have to be consistent in your approach to give it the things that it needs to heal, because healing is what you need. I don't care if you're trying to lose belly fat or if you're trying to heal your elbow, you need healing. Okay, you need to provide it with the foundational blocks it needs from nutrition standpoint. You need to manage your stress really well. Otherwise, you're going to deal with these things. It's going to be a really long road.
Yep, no doubt. And a lot of it too, when we look at how that impacts, sometimes it's just as simple as changing your mindset
For sure.
towards things, because life happens. We know that. We all go through,
we've experienced that.
To be transparent, the last month has been the hardest on our family in so many ways, and most people know about it. I'm not going to go into details, but our mental approach to it has always been positive through it all, and understanding there's a greater mission behind everything that happens. And ultimately with that, though, we haven't dwelled. We haven't had a negative impact from it. And we've remained consistent with what we need to. Yeah, we had a little hiccup. And ultimately that caused, I didn't get into the gym for 3 weeks. I had tension, I had issues and things like that were going on, and with my own internal body, needed to heal. Not just a physical level, but a heart level and a head level. You gotta make sure that they're all working appropriately.
For sure.
And so now consistency's key. That's what I was in this morning.
There you go.
That's where it's at.
There it is. So that was fun. We'll do it again. We'll get something scheduled out. I thought that was a pretty good little break in between. Brandon Wallpe Chiropractic, Batesville, Indiana. Anybody, you want to tell people how they can reach out to you?
So
however you want.
Yeah. So
don't give them your personal cell phone. Don't do that.
Oh no. No one has that. Maybe you might, but
I might, but I'll keep it to myself.
Yeah. So ultimately, you can call the front office. Either Kim or Abby will be able to direct you. The front office number is 812-363-5634. You can always go online to wallpechiropractic.com. We have an online portal if you want to request an appointment there too. I'll be honest. I am limiting my new patients per month to 5 because of how busy it is. But Dr. Meyer is also available, and he does a very thorough job and is a wonderful physician as well. Dr. Scott Meyer, if you don't know him, look him up. You can meet all of us on our website. We actually have bios and our backgrounds and where it is that we're passionate about in life, not just within healthcare, but also just what we enjoy doing, and
everything
allows to help the whole system work better. But yeah, if anybody's interested, they can always call the office and schedule that way.
Right on.
Or find a really, really good, I'll be honest, if you don't have this is going to be, it's Chiropractic Health Month, National Chiropractic Health Month, so I have to say this. Not because I have to, but because it's true mainly. Find a good chiropractor who actually cares about your health. Someone who will physically sit down with you, talk to you, and determine where your issues are. Don't just go somewhere because that's where your parents went to, your grandparents went to, where you spend 5 minutes and maybe the only words that comes out of your physician's mouth is, "Hey, how you doing?" And then that's it.
And here's some BioFreeze.
Yeah, here's some popping and some BioFreeze. We'll throw some heat and some stim on that and have a great day. If they're just doing that with you and you have more intense issues going on, it might be time to check and talk to them about it. Either one, first talk to them about it, because I'll be honest, a lot of guys and girls, there's a lot of physicians, chiropractic physicians that, I'll be honest, unfortunately get stuck in the routine. And sometimes,
just like anything.
Yeah, and sometimes patients, they're not a routine. They're an individual person who needs help.
Right.
And if you need that specific help, talk to them. They are, I'd say, out of most professions, probably some of the most caring and compassionate people I've ever known. A lot of my colleagues and people I graduated with are wholeheartedly in it to help patients and to help you thrive. So if you don't have a specific chiropractor, call one who will literally do those things for you. Will sit down and talk to you, discuss your nutrition, discuss your movement patterns, discuss your sleep, even sometimes discussing emotional and mental health. Sometimes I feel like I'm a psychologist. It's weird, but I'm not. I refer some to a relative of mine who is.
There you go.
So that's helpful. But finding someone who will give you the time of day that you deserve. Not that you need, but you truly deserve more than anything else as a human being. So
good notes to add on Chiropractic Health Month.
Yeah.
Very good.
And we didn't even talk about neurology. We'll have to do that another time.
Neurology, that'd be a good one too. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast with Dr. Brandon Wallpe. We'll be back next week, and I'll have another... it'll be an unfamiliar face. James will be back with us here in a couple weeks. No worries. Until then, you guys know how to get a hold of us, or how to get a hold of Brandon Wallpe now. If you want to get a hold of me, the Silver Bullet Podcast at gmail.com. Questions, comments, concerns, anything you guys want to address in the future. I'm always taking in new questions from people, and we still have a list that we're working through. Appreciate you guys for all those. Appreciate you guys for listening. Brandon, thanks for coming in with me.
Anytime.
All right, guys, this is the Silver Bullet Podcast.